Hey, soldiers, you know what your problem is as an American? You're thinking about inflation in the wrong way. Nancy Pelosi says, look, okay, you got it all wrong. This is how you should be thinking about inflation.
And the fact is that when I hear people talk about inflation, as I heard him there, we have to change that subject. Inflation is a global phenomenon.
Yes.
The EU, the European Union, the UK, the British have a higher inflation rate than we do here.
All right, so you see, because it's happening in other places too, this should somehow, make you feel better when you go to the grocery store and have to pay elevated prices, or when you go to the gas pump. And Biden, he bragged the other day about how he had brought gas prices down below where they were when he came into office. Now, I don't know if he's confused, which is probably the case, or if he's just flat out lying, but the truth of the matter is gas prices are still elevated compared to where they were when the president came into office. So you're feeling this pinch, but according to Speaker Pelosi, look, it's happening everywhere. So get over it, okay? Basically is what she's saying. Now, there are some factors that are going to lead to inflation remaining high, especially in the area of food. And of course, we're going to talk about some things that you need to do in order to insulate yourself and protect your family from that. All right. Now, a lot of what we talk about is focused on you maintaining some ability to continue to buy assets, especially in an environment where assets are more affordable than they may have been in recent years. Okay, so with that said, understand that there are some rumblings out there that the Fed is going to adjust its target rate for inflation from 2% to 3%. Now, for many years, it has been widely known that the way we measure inflation today, the Fed wants to keep it at 2%. They thought that was a reasonable rate. But because they know full well that inflation is not going to be able to be brought under control in the near term, and they also understand that if they continue to raise interest rates, it's going to really, really bog down the economy. Now, this is a consequence of easy money that we've, basically had for many, many years now. Michael Hartnett is a strategist with Bank of America, and he's noteworthy because back in 2021, he came out and he made a statement saying that inflation was going to remain elevated through 2024, through that time frame. And so far, he has been right. Now, Hartnett is suggesting that the Fed is going to change that interest rate target from 2% to 3%. Now, let's also talk about the real inflation rate. The fact that inflation is measured differently from what it was back in the 1980s. And part of the reason for that is because the government is responsible for paying cost of living increases to Social Security recipients, Medicare and Medicaid recipients, based on the rate of inflation. So it does not suit the government at all. We're already saddled with a $21 trillion debt, not even $31 trillion, I'm sorry, not even counting those unfunded liabilities, Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. So we're already just in a situation where if we added more interest to the debt, we would be in an untenable situation. Peter Schiff actually made mention of that here recently. In a recent tweet that you see here, Schiff said, at the rate the national debt and interest rates are rising, before the decade ends, interest on the national debt will exceed 100% of federal tax revenue. The entire federal government would then consist of the Treasury Department, which would just collect taxes and pay interest. Okay, so we're in an untenable situation with the interest rates being defined at, in the 8% range right now. To say nothing of what an organization like Shadow Stats puts inflation at in the reality, again, measuring it in the way that we did many years ago, then inflation would be in the 15 to 16% range. So you can see how the government literally cannot afford to reveal that true inflation rate. And let me say this, when I talk about the government, in terms of when I talk about it from an economic standpoint, I'm talking about us, the U.S. taxpayer, because that's where this government gets its money. That's where all governments get their money. And the government of the United States of America is not out there selling any widgets or any services. Okay, they have the IRS that says, here are your tax rates, pay it or else. That's how the government generates its revenue. So this is where we are with regard to inflation. Now, the other thing I want to mention here is from the standpoint of food inflation, we're likely going to see a situation where, again, for staples, we are going to remain in an elevated situation, food price-wise, at the grocery store for a few years. This may be directly in line with what Harnett was saying. And I mentioned food inflation because that is something that none of us can totally avoid. As you know, we grow stuff here, but we're not going to totally replace our calories. I don't have a farm, right? So, you know about the butternut squash and the potatoes, and, that'll carry us through for those two, for a high calorie starch and a vegetable for, up until like late winter. But we still have to go to the grocery store. I don't slaughter cows or goats and stuff like that. So that leads me to the situation with wheat and corn in America due to drought. 75% of the winter wheat crop in the United States is suffering from drought. The odds are stacking up that this winter's growing season in the Midwest is going to be a bad one. The latest government data shows drought is intensifying across the western half of the United States. As for winter wheat, 75% of crop areas are in drought, the highest level in decades. Gary Milishasky, he is the chairman of the Kansas Wheat Commission, said farmers who typically spread chemical fertilizer on their fields in the winter to allow the soil to replenish with nutrients ahead of the spring growing season are pulling back because of the fear that that fertilizer will just evaporate. We've done videos about the fertilizer shortage and how the prices of fertilizer are skyrocketing, so you definitely can't afford to waste it. Miloshansky also grows corn in addition to wheat in the southern portion of Kansas. He said he planted about 4,000 acres of winter wheat, but only expected to harvest 1,500 acres because of the severe drought. And as you know, that's not even half of what he planted. He said that when it's that dry, you don't know whether it's going to sprout and die or even come up in the next year. The lack of moisture indicates that some plants might not even sprout until spring, which would jeopardize yields. Mark Nelson, director of commodities at the Kansas Farm Bureau, has already warned that the rate of emerged plants is already falling behind average levels for this time of year. All right, now all this is in addition to the disruption of the global wheat market caused by the war in Ukraine. Remember, we've said it time and time again, that Ukrainian flag is a testament to that country's importance in terms of the global wheat crop, because you got the blue on top of the gold, and basically what that symbolizes is a blue sky on the top there, and it's a wheat field. That yellow is symbolic of a wheat field. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But that's where we are. And remember, when you think of wheat, you probably automatically think of bread, but we're talking about some other items as well, like actually pastas and different types of culinary paste. Now, when you look at that wheat crop, what kind of foods can you expect to see an increase in if we have a shortage of wheat? Well, cakes, crackers, of course, bread, and again, the aforementioned pasta. So as we've said before, in America, this will culminate in an affordability issue, which will be commensurate with, inflation staying elevated. In other parts of the world, it will culminate in an availability issue. Now, we're in the West here, okay? So sometimes it's because we have so much abundance and our gripe is price, we can forget or take for granted that we still have an abundance of choice, okay, in our diet. But this thing, yes, it's going to affect us from a pocketbook standpoint. But in other parts of the globe, especially the developing world, we might see a dangerous situation with regard to famine, okay? Because wheat and corn are things that are exported to help relieve famine and provide food aid in different parts of the world. So we may see a rise in that. We probably will, unfortunately. And to add insult to injury, you just recently had India curb some of its exports of rice to parts of Africa and different parts of Asia. So there is an impending rice shortage as well. So those staple foods, we're seeing the demand remain elevated. Okay, we got to eat, right? And we're seeing the supply be interrupted and in some cases decrease. That's a recipe for shortages and price hikes. Okay, guys, do what you can to store up food to the extent that you can. Be as self-sufficient as you can in replacing some of your calories by gardening. I'm in an apartment, you say. I get it. There are community gardens. We talk about them all the time. Check in your county. I'm sure you can find more than one. All right. So a drastic measure. Some people go out in, I'm not suggesting this, but some people go out into public land and start their own crops, okay, where, there's barely any people. I'm talking about food crops, okay? I know some of you soldiers out there might have thought I was talking about another kind of crop. But no, we're talking about food crops. You got to eat. Guys, watch this video. It's about the developing situation in the real estate market that's going to be bad for some, but great for others in terms of acquiring assets and making money. Check it out. And guys, I will talk to you soon.